Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Series 2023, where we aim to add value to people's lives every Wednesday and Thursday on ebusradio.com. You can chat or we chat about everything leadership, coaching, and marketing, and you can catch us on the Lunchtime Series on all major podcast channels today. To help us grow our channel, please follow, like, and share. And joining me in today's coaching segment, we have someone who is all the way like across the planet, literally. And she helps middle managers to unlock their leadership potential and build better teams. She's a leadership coach, facilitator, speaker, and host of the Scale to Grow podcast, the Scale to Grow podcast. Please welcome to the show, Shauna Vassell. Is it Shauna Vassell, right?
It's Vassell, yes.
So there we go. Shauna, thank you for joining me. Thanks for being on the show.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be on the show and be able to share however I can.
Absolutely. So, as you know, it's an aim of adding value, and I think when we first chatted, we had such a really good conversation around this important conversation we're going to be having today. So I'm gonna leave it to you to sort of just tell everybody a little bit about you and sort of preface what it is we're going to be talking about today, and then we'll go from there.
Oh, awesome. So a little bit about me. So I actually work primarily with middle managers. And one of the things I do is I focus on working with them to not only build leadership competencies, but also to help them to become a bit more self-aware of the areas within not just their personal life, but also their professional life that gets in the way or are potential blind spots for them to reach their full potential. And a lot of times, what I find with the people that I work with, it greatly affects their ability to confidently show up as a leader, as well as their ability to lead effectively a team that probably they would be a fantastic manager at, or a manager or a leader, but because all of these things are getting in the way, they never get the opportunity to really get to that full potential. So that's in a nutshell what I do and who I work with. My background, I actually come from both the public and private sector. So one of the fantastic things about being in public sector is that you have to put in some elbow grease to motivate people if you really want to get them to do something. And it's something, and it's a skill that when you go into a private sector, there is no carrot to dangle. You really have to think about, how do I dig deeper to find that intrinsic value that that person has that can get them to be more engaged, get them to be more motivated, and to really help them to become their best selves in the position that they have.
Absolutely, I love that. So, and with that intrinsic value, one of the things that sort of leads that to this conversation we're having today, right? Leading with empathy to getting better results. Why this topic? Why do you think this is a good, kicking off 2023, people are back with a bang. There's a lot of people already rushing into this year like no one's business. And why do you think it's a step back and it's a consideration for how do we get better results with empathy? Take us through that. Why empathy?
Oh, okay. So this is an interesting one, because this one for me came up because I had a few people who came on, and just like you said, 2023, everybody's jumping in and saying, we need to deliver this. We need to go here. We need to change this. We lost how much time in this production, or the deliverables were behind because of all the pandemic and things we couldn't control, but this year is different. And with that comes a lot of stress and a lot of pressure to do more. And we're currently working with a shortage of resources. And one of the things that comes up is that a lot of people don't realize that empathy affects your ability to build stronger and healthier relationships within your team, within your colleague, within just your peer group. And when you're more aware of not just your own feelings, but the feelings of others, it will help you to really tap into some of the areas in your leadership that could help you to bridge that connection and bridge that and make that extra ability available for you to not only engage people who are probably overworked, probably overtaxed, probably have a lot of things going on, probably thinking about possibly leaving the organization, and create that connector to really understand kind of what it is that you can do as a manager, as a leader, to help them to not only have a good work-life balance, but to also be able to innovate and bring that creativity back to the workplace.
So yes, my with that said, right, and I think it's it's such an important conversation to reiterate, because people have heard that leading with empathy is an important thing.
Mm-hmm.
The quiet quitting, that the theme that we know has sort of started happening in the world, the quiet quitting that's starting to sort of infiltrate organizations, is part and parcel of not using empathy as a tool.
Yes.
Because you're not coming from a place and a position from as leader to really empathize that this person's going through stuff, or this person's not feeling energized, or this person doesn't feel motivated in where they're at. So, quiet quitting in itself as a strange phenomenon is already curbed by the sense of really leading with empathy, right? Do you see that as well?
Absolutely. And one of the things that I always say, we need to really take a step back, because everybody jumps in and says, well, as a leader, you're supposed to know this stuff. You're supposed to be able to lead empathetically. It's shouldn't it be a natural thing for you as a leader? And the answer to that is not really. Not everybody is going to be naturally empathetic, because sometimes it might take a bit more work for others to really tap into, okay, what am I seeing in front of me? They can probably recognize it from a cognitive place, but they're not really connecting with it on any other level, because they can see, but they're like, the deliverable is more important. I have to do this. Okay, bring your professional self to work, drop it at the door. Like, I can't deal with this right now. And they kind of shove it off. But it's not that they're trying to make the work life difficult, or they're not tuned in. A lot of times it just really takes that ability for them to get self-aware, because sometimes you don't know as the leader that you're not being empathetic. And to someone else, that perception of you is coming off as definitely not demonstrating empathy in your leadership. And that's why a lot of leaders or managers really they're not equipped to provide certain levels of support. And what happened pre-pandemic versus during the pandemic and now is they're now taking on an additional layer of emotional work to not only stimulate the employees to do a job, but they're also trying to stimulate them to be their best selves, because there was a significant amount of personal changes that probably happened with a lot of people. And in order to really be a truly empathetic leader, you will really have to be able to tap into that active listening, to sit with those people and really understand, okay, so you are now taking care of your elderly parent. You are now you're the only breadwinner. Oh, your husband was in tech. They got laid off. Okay, so now the rent is too high. You can't afford to come in every day, but we're implementing a policy that's telling you need to be here. So you have to be able to really understand how all these things are going to affect not just your leadership, but also the person who's in front of you. And sometimes people are just not equipped, because what they thought when they went to that 5-day workshop, that, they got that little spiel about, coaching as a leader, do this as a leader, to talk to your people. There's that other complexity as to there's surface layer things that they have to now tap into and build better skills on. It's not just, okay, I listen. Okay, yes, I get it. They're going through a tough time. But now it's like, okay, they're going through a tough time, but how do I support them without showing favoritism, without losing the accountability, and without missing the mandate that I have to deliver? So there's a lot going on. So I think empathy, it's a nice word to say, but I think we're missing the fact that a lot of leaders are there's a lot of emotional work behind the word empathy.
Absolutely. And I don't, I think I had this conversation with another coach the other day, and it was so profound when she said this. And she said, there's a difference between being empathetic and being nice.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, yes, there's it's such a vast difference, right? When you're empathetic, you're sitting, in that version and kind of going, if that was me, if I couldn't pay the rent, and if I was laid off, or if my partner was X, Y, and Z, or I had to look after a parent, all those things, like how would that affect me, and what decisions would I then make? So it's really getting, instead of just being nice and saying, oh, we'll take some time off, and like really sitting with them for half an hour and really being with them in that space to understand what someone's going through. And as you're talking through it, I think it's also pushing the button on leaders to step it up.
Mm.
Like there's long gone are the days where I'm the manager and I'll tell you what to do. Like, it's like you really have to, people need people to be human first and then a manager, and I think that's why leading with empathy is such an important conversation to have. But I mean, tell us some, what are some of the drivers for empathy? Because that's sort of gives people more insight on why why this topic is so important.
So that's a really great question, because the drivers for empathy, it's really starts with the fact that there's so much going on. There's a lot of change, first of all, and a lot of the change that's out there is affecting not just the ability to, and I'll start with the organization structure. A lot of the organizational structure right now is very much it's very much changed from what the traditional version of leadership was, especially when we're talking about the generational baby boomers and, just leaders in general. So you have less control over how the work is going to come out at the end, because you are now moving away from a command and control and more into flat organizations where you have to trust the people that are working for you. And in order to really understand it, and I think this is part that I think Daniel Goleman, I think he had the different elements that really drive empathy for the most part. And it's really understanding others and developing others and having more of a service orientation and a little bit more, and leveraging diversity, and also just being more aware politically as to what's happening around you. And the reason for that is because, as I said, the more of a push to flatter organization, your control as a leader is more to have a solid understanding of the person who's in front of you, the person who is responsible for that particular area, and being able to look and say, okay, am I tuning into their emotional cues? If I assign them this new initiative to deliver, and I can't see, especially from a middle manager, they have it from the bottom and they have it from the top, the pressure that they face. And if as a director or of an executive that says, okay, well, I expect him to deliver. I signed it to him. He's a capable person. But that middle manager now has to look at, okay, well, I only have two hands. I only have this much time in the day. I have these many people under me that are also responsible for little pockets within the organization. How am I going to now structure how am I going to structure that work, but be able to understand that the person in front of me is going to be tuned into his team and be able to develop the team under him, so that we can know what the expectations are to bring back the deliverables that we're trying to achieve. And this is where you need to really understand, when you're developing others, if that person is struggling, it's listening to see, are they struggling because something's happening at home, or are they struggling because they truly need you to help them, support them to build capacity or to build a capability to do the thing that you're asking. And part of that is looking, again, if I'm following through on Daniel Goleman, it's really that service orientation where a lot of operational folks, it's always about, service. Am I put in, is it part of put into service first? What are they experiencing on the other side? And really understanding that, and understanding that people are different. They're so different. And because they're so different, am I comparing an oak tree to a cacti and trying to implement things across the board that is not going to give them any value, that is just going to be something that rolls off and just say, they just assigned this thing again. We all know it's going to fall flat. It's not going to go anywhere. And really understand that there are so many different power dynamics because you have people that are vying for different agendas. So how do you really check in what primarily is the struggle or the challenge that that person has? And the only way you can really do that from an empathy perspective is really taking a step back and looking, okay, well, my span of control has completely gone out the window for the most part, because I cannot control all the pieces. The only thing I can do is build the trust in my people, build the capacity in my people, and build the capability, and give them enough room and space so that they can become better at what they do.
I love it. So, I'm just making notes of some of the things that you've mentioned. And so, like checking your own biases, for example, like that awareness you're speaking about, and being more inclusive, and how that's happening, and if that's on top, top of mind. Curiosity, be a little bit more curious about your environment, about your people, about what's happening and what people are going through. And then, service orientation, like it's, be of service to your people. It gets thrown around as a, I'm a servant leader, but like, do you really know what that means? Have you really sat down and thought about, when you get up and when you leave the office, and when you're making the next appointment, when you're speaking in a meeting, are you really at service of these people? Because it's an active consciousness that needs to happen when you're leading with empathy at the end of the day. But one of the questions you have here is, what happens when a leader is too empathetic? And I was like, too empathetic? Like, is there a thing like being too empathetic?
Well, the thing is, it's interesting because being too empathetic is, I always say if when someone tells me that they're too empathetic, the first thing I ask is, from a self-awareness perspective, or how well do you know yourself? Because being too empathetic, and sometimes you do have empaths, like my partner is an absolute empath. And in order to deliver with some of his team, he has to go on the opposite end of the spectrum, because otherwise he would get so wrapped up in the, how are they going to feel? Like, what if this happened? And he creates like this whole thing in his head. Yes. And, and then at some point he'll go on the opposite end. And then at the end, he'll come home and he'll say, oh my God, I had to fire this person. Oh my God, I had to do this. And I'm thinking, okay, so what about that is the struggle for you? What is it that is so hard? And it's because deep down, he does not want to disappoint someone. He does not want to be the reason that someone has a bad performance and they have to let them go. He does not want to be responsible for people not liking him. And if you know yourself to be this person, and this is why I go back to, if you're going to say I'm a very empathetic leader, are you empathetic because you are trying to be liked? Are you empathetic because you're trying to understand the person? Because going back to your service orientation, are you doing it because of the person, or are you doing it because of something within you that either doesn't have very healthy boundaries, or you aren't aware of some of the challenges that you have from a more personal growth perspective? Because a lot of that comes up when you think of empathy, because some people go behind this title to say, well, I'm an empathetic leader, and then they abdicate their whole accountability piece. and not hold people accountable or do any of the hard stuff because they avoid the difficult conversation.
Yeah.
And this is something that, can you be too empathetic? And I will say, yes, you can be, but there's underlying things to that. And that's where the complexity comes in. So when someone, when I get someone that says, oh, I have someone who just is just a complete pushover. And I say, okay, that's fair. Let's talk to them. Let's understand kind of what's happening. And I kid you not, 9 out of 10 times they're either a recovering people pleaser. It's always something underneath it that's just it's less about that service orientation and more about them struggling with not being liked, not feeling like they're disappointing someone. And it's so much deeper. And it's about really tapping into some of those limited beliefs and perceptions that they have.
So your ego is not getting stroked because you're thinking you're being nice and you're like too empathetic and you're like, oh, I'm like, that's because that's what's coming up for me. Because like maybe that root kind of thing is really, it's your ego that's sort of getting in the way of you actually being and dealing with it. Because being an empathetic leader doesn't mean you have to avoid difficult conversations, because sometimes people need the difficult conversations. You still need to be the leader. You still need to lead, which includes the difficult conversation. So you can't avoid it in aim of being an empathetic leader or a version of one. It's across the board. Put yourself in that position. But if you need to have that difficult conversation, say, okay, cool, we can help you adjust this and this and this, but this is what I require from you to be able to achieve what we need to achieve at the end of the day. That's the difference. And that's what I'm hearing with ego can really play a part in stroking me because I feel better.
Absolutely. And you would be surprised that, a lot of us think, ego is such a bad thing to say about yourself, but it does so much damage when you don't really acknowledge that some of this stuff is, if you don't really do that self-check to say, is it more about me or is it about this person? Why I'm like, is there something that I'm missing? Am I more leaning towards, how I feel versus the person feels? Because if that's the case, then you're really not being empathetic. You're really more in your own self-interest at this point.
And that leads me to the Arbinger Institute of Leadership, because they have such beautiful, they speak about the inward and the outward way of looking at the world, right? And when it's an inward focused approach to leadership, it's all about me. It's all about, what do I get? What do I do? How does this affect me? How does this affect my numbers? How does it affect me? How I would look at the end of the day. And you're going, well, if any of those questions apply in this scenario, that's a complete inward kind of approach to leadership. And that is very destructive and can be quite destructive to the people who are working with you, because at the end of the day, that is not empathy. And that is completely ego driven. And it can be quite damaging to the environment, right? But I mean, so one of the things you mentioned here is, what role does self-awareness play in being empathetic? Because like that comment, that one question is a whole show on its own, right?
Exactly.
But tell us, from what you've experienced, why this is such an important factor.
So the thing about self-awareness, it's always, I think we assume that we always start with the externals instead of starting with what's inside. And going back to what you said about the inwards versus the outwards, if you are not self-aware as to how you show up, or the things that are triggers for you, or the areas of growth that you might potentially have, what you are going to find is that you make decisions that will not show up as very empathetic, and you're going to make decisions that could possibly self-serving or self-interest, to your point about focused on your deliverables, your mandate, your things, versus looking at the team as a whole, looking at the broader organization. And the reason for that is, I'm not saying that you should be a complete martyr to everything that's going on, but it's really understanding, what drives you. And one of the people that I had, I remember when we met, he was in this position and he was required to collect money. I don't know if I told you this story, but he was required to collect money. That was part of his job. He was managing a team that they were doing collections, and he's so family oriented from a values perspective. And whenever they had to collect from someone who would potentially have hardship, even though at the core that person probably owes that money and probably defaulted, but if he knew that, and he would have a different approach. And one of his KPIs or his OKRs is really just is being able to collect as much within a period of time, and that would be part of their recovery. So what he would do was, when his team would do all this fantastic work and get to the point to get him to sign off, he would be the final person who would adjust a number based on reading all the documentation, and it will be lower. So the overall team score would be lower because he was constantly adjusting based on what his judgment call was.
Yeah.
And he was on the chopping block because while he was a great manager, people loved him. He was doing fantastic with engagement. He had one of the longest retention in the entire organization. His engagement scores were great. That part of the deliverable was never his strong point. And when they did a 360, the team members all said, how can I be the best at what I'm doing if he's constantly adjusting things? Because then my score goes down and it affects the whole team. For him, he thought that was a bad thing. He's like, I do everything else. Why is this a problem? But the issue is, it wasn't that he was an incompetent manager or that he couldn't meet his deliverable. From a values perspective, this wasn't the right place for him.
Yeah.
So we had to look at, how do we move him into another part of the organization that was more beneficial to the values that he brought. And we moved him into more account nurturing, where he was spending more time building relationships with people and growing those relationships, where he could find out about the kids, he could find out what they like, he could build that portfolio and hand it off to people who would be able to kind of benefit from his relationship nurturing. And he was never happy. He was never happier. Like, he was so ecstatic that he left. But this is part of, when you think of self-awareness, you have to really understand, what are some of my values? What are some of the things that really light me up? What are the things that could affect me, whether on a subconscious level or just because it's just not in your sweet spot? But the only way you're going to know this is when you're more self-aware in terms of what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, what are some of the growth areas for yourself, and where are some of the areas that it may not just be a thing for you. It's just not at the top of your radar in terms of what you want to do for the future. So when you're really in tune to that, for you to then lead someone, and I remember someone she's a competitive person, and she got a high performer and had no idea what to do with it, because she was like, I feel like I have to compete with her. I had to pull her back and said, why are you in this job? Why exactly are you in this job? She's like, because I'm really good at people management. So why do you think you have to compete with her? Well, I don't know. I just feel like I have to, because she knows so much. But I said, but she is looking for you for support. And someone who's self-aware. And then when I brought her back and I said, okay, let's go through some assessments. Let's look at some of the things that really triggers you. She's just a competitive person in general. She does a lot of sports. She does a lot of things, but growing a team, she had to learn that part. One of her blind sides is she's looking at everybody as competition as a new leader. So we had to look at, how do you grow as a manager to lead a team that is going to be probably more expertise than you, but you can support them in different ways. And that was her blind spot. So it's a long way around the self-awareness thing. So I I went off on a tangent on that one.
No, I think the point that you so specifically make around self-awareness is, especially when you're put in the very fortunate position of leadership. And I preface it that way quite specific because we sometimes take it for granted and deserving that, obviously I'm the right choice. But with that comes a whole bunch of responsibility, and part of the responsibility that you have as a leader is to be able to constantly and actively and avidly want to grow and learn more about you and be better for your team. And no one's short of learning anything at any time of their lives. You could spend your life learning all the time, but so for as a leadership skill, becoming curious about your own blind spots and being open to the feedback, and going to your team to kind of go, what do you think are some of the blind spots that I do have that I'm not aware of, or that I'm sort of not seeing, that could be influencing the team as a whole, right? Because again, that then really pushes the button of self-awareness. We're probably having load shedding, so that's why our power goes off like this. So sorry about that.
No worries.
But essentially, that's what what happens is that we need the mirror being held up for us to be able to say, yes, this is your blind spot, and these are the things that you need to sort of work on. But Shauna, so how can we become empathetic in your own leadership? Give us some practical tips that we can take away from today's conversations.
So the practical things about becoming more empathetic as a leader, and I think we touched on it throughout, and it's really about understanding yourself, becoming more self-aware. I think that's the first thing. And the second one I would say is listen more and be present. A lot of times we take for granted the power of just listening to what's being said, what's not being said, and going from there. And one of the examples I can use with this is there was someone who, she wasn't speaking up a lot in presentations, and every time we would pass the torch to her and say, like, give your updates, she'll kind of rush through it and just kind of end there. And for promotions, they wouldn't look at her to see that she had potential. And one of the things that was beneficial was we moved her to another group, and she got one of our leaders who was really in tune with the team and was so wonderful. And she listened. And one of the things that came up was she was deathly afraid of big crowds. And that was something that nobody ever got out of her for years. But she wanted to change. So as part of her performance, she put her hand up to do more presentations, do things, and she was squirreling her off to learn new skills and communication. And she became one of the most vocal people in some of our meetings and was able to get promoted. But if someone didn't spend the time to sit down and really listen to her, because the first thing was, okay, she's not very good with communication, so we're not going to really invest in her because we just don't have the time to build. And that was a conversation. But once you listen and you're present, you can get so much out of it. She was one of our top people for so long just because of that. And I think that's the second thing. So understand yourself and become self-aware. And the second is listen more, and just be intuitive to understand what people are saying and not saying. And the third one is, I would say, give yourself some grace, that if you're not empathetic, that it's okay, because not everybody is naturally empathetic. There's different levels of how you're going to receive feelings that people portray. So either you're doing it from a cognitive level, or you might be looking at it from more of an emotional space. but it doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means that you have a different way of digesting the empathy, the emotions that are in front of you, and ask questions. I think we need to ask questions and we need to communicate to understand as opposed to just communicating for the sake of communication. So I think if you're looking to become more empathetic in your leadership, I think these are some key things that you can do.
I absolutely love that. Shauna, I mean, it's been a fantastic conversation. I think, it's really unpacked empathy a little bit more for people to kind of just get their brains wrapped around it. And I absolutely love it. And I want to thank you for joining us. If we want to get hold of you, like, what is the best place for us to go? What are your sort of your handles, or where's your website, and where do we go to get hold of you if we want to know more?
Okay, so our website is www.concaved, so KONCAVED.com.
Yeah.
And that's our website. Our social media handles is pretty much the same word. So concaved, so KONCAVED coaching. And that's across the board on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn as well, I believe. And I say I believe, but once you type it in, you'll find us. In terms of how you can get a hold of me, for LinkedIn, you can just type in Shauna Vassell and voila, there's not a lot of us on here. So
Fantastic. Shauna Vassell, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for chatting about the empathy, leading with empathy at least, and joining us on the Lunchtime series. Please come back for more. And thank you for joining me, and I'll chat to you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me, guys.
Cheers for now. Bye.